the father, le nom du père. Phrase used by Jacques Lacan in relation to the Oedipus complex, which signals the subject's comprehension of paternal or authoritative prohibition, a prohibition constitutive of authority. Lacan plays on the homophonic quality of the French for name, nom, which sounds like the French for no, non. Narratee. The person to whom a narrative is directed, whether a character or characters in a narrative, such as those to whom Marlowe tells of his journey down the Congo in Conrad's Heart of Darkness, or the real or implied reader of any narrative. Narrative. At its most fundamental, a narrative is an account of events, whether real or fictional. However, narrative differs from the idea of a simple unordered account or report of events, supposing such a thing to be possible. Gerard Genette offers a sustained account of narrative structure and form in his narrative discourse, which addresses 5 principal aspects of narrative. 1. Order of events. 2. Duration of events and the time it takes to tell incidents. 3. Frequency or repetition of events, and how such recurrences shape the narrative form from the basic deicisis. 4. Mood, by which Genette indicates the narrator's point of view, perspective, distance or proximity to the events narrated. 5. Narrative voice. For Genette, the analysis of narrative concerns itself and implies the study of a series of relationships which make up narrative, these being 1. The relationship between a particular discourse and the events which are retold through that discourse, and 2. The relationship between the discourse and the act of narration. Thus, there is for Genette a tripartite structure at its most basic to any narrative: discourse, narration, event, or, as he formulates it, analysis of narrative is a study of the relationships between narrative and story, between narrative and narrating, and story and narrating. Studying narrative is therefore not simply comprehending it as an account, but also an analytical understanding of how a narrative is given the shape it has, why certain events have greater significance than others in relation to the totality of the narrative, and how events retold are shaped by the act of narration or the role of the narrator. Narratology. Theory and systematic study of narrative, and especially the study of the structural, formal and temporal elements of narrative and the relationships between them. Narratology will address the functions of duration, repetition, the chronological or anachronic reordering of events out of a progressive temporal linear sequence, the role of the narrator, and the various levels of discourse, along with their hierarchical or architectonic relationships, which constitute narrative structure. Negritude. Neologism to define the political, cultural and historical affirmation and consciousness of Black culture of collective African heritage and origin, conceived by poet Aimé Césaire in the 1930s. Neoimperialism. Relating to the manner in which nations, policies or practices extend their dominion or authority over other, often less economically or culturally viable others. Neurosis. In psychology, a disabling or distressing disorder, often manifesting itself in irrational anxiety. Nihilism. Philosophical rejection of all systems of belief, whether religious or secular, and a denial of the meaning of moral systems. Also, a term applied to the existential despair in the face of a presumed lack of meaning or purpose to life. Also, nihilism is interpreted as a destructive or negative, hostile attitude towards institutions and structures of belief. Nomad, Nomadism, Nomadology. Term associated with the work of Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, which vigorously stresses the possibility of thinking differently, and which is given extended consideration in their 8,000 plateaus. Deleuze and Guattari's concern in employing this term is not with a particular content of thought so much as with the utopian expression of an other modality of thought beyond dominant philosophical models. Deleuze does not propose an absolute model of nomadic thinking, but merely suggests, idealistically and as a hope, its possibility. Nomadic thinking would be just thinking which does not remain within epistemological territories. Indeed, a feature of nomadism in thought would be its flow and, with that, its deterritorialization of structured models or disciplines of thought. Concomitant on that flow of nomadic thinking would be its strategic weakness, that is to say the abandonment of the aggressiveness typical of territorial modes of thought. Furthermore, nomadic thinking is nomadic. It drifts, often from itself, in that it is not centered on any authoritative governing or originary principle by which it might ground itself and thereby defend its territory, and to which it might return. Nominalism, a theory that argues against the notion of universal essences in reality and maintains that only individual perspectives, rather than abstract generalities, exist. Normativity, the postulation of hegemonic culturally prescribed norms or standards such as heterosexuality. Nouveau Roman, French term that translates as new novel, referring to a movement that developed in the 1950s and continued in the 1960s. Its practitioners included Philip Sollers, Nathalie Sarraute, Alain Robbe-Grillet, Marguerite Duras and Claude Simon. In the Nouveau Roman, many of the conventions of realism and other traditional novel forms were abandoned in favor of more experimental narrative modes in order to convey more accurately the random and discontinuous nature of modern experience.